and generous person. She always greeted me with love and made me feel like I was a sister from the first time I met her. We had grown really close over the years because we were both working women, and we would spend our weekends shopping or going to lunch together. Zara was always incredibly fit and took excellent care of her health. This is why the sad news of her breast cancer diagnosis shocked us all so deeply. We united behind her and supported her fight against cancer. I made it a point to visit her frequently during her chemotherapy rounds to spend time with her and watch over my infant niece whenever possible. During one of my visits to her home, while we sat together in her living room, she told me some news that broke my heart. Her voice trembled as she stated that her physicians had delivered a devastating diagnosis. Her cancer was severe and resistant to therapy. They'd given her a prognosis that left little room for optimism. The weight of her comments weighed heavily in the air, and I fought to find the perfect words to console her during that vulnerable moment. I asked her what I could do to make everything easy for her. Her eyes, which were typically filled with love and joy, suddenly showed a mixture of fear and resignation. She thanked me for everything I had done for her and expressed her desire not to burden me with a secret she had kept concealed from everyone. I strongly stated that she had nothing to apologize for and that I would do anything for her, no questions asked. She then entrusted me with a secret she had never told anyone, including her own parents. She told me that years ago, during her undergraduate days, she went through a horrible experience that has haunted her ever since. She was the victim of a sexual attack at a party, where she had been drinking too much. The attacker wore a mask, making it impossible for her to recognize him. The horror of that night left severe scars that she had been carrying silently for years. As she described the events of that fatal evening, I listened in terror. She was then in a relationship with my brother. Naturally, she looked to him for help and consolation, expecting that he would be the one person in the world who understood her. Instead of finding relief in his embrace, she was confronted with astonishment and accusations. My brother couldn't understand how another man could violate her in this way. In disbelief, he began to question her actions, indicating that perhaps her clothes or demeanor toward the guy at the party had prompted the assault. He refused to think that a man could accomplish such a thing unless the lady gave him a signal. Zara was heartbroken that he was questioning her in this manner. The weight of shame and guilt, wrongfully imposed on her by someone she loved, exacerbated her pain. Despite this, she summoned the bravery to denounce the assault to the police and even underwent a medical examination, which confirmed her claim about the assault. She wanted the culprit punished. Unfortunately for Zara, she lived in a college neighborhood where parties were prevalent and thousands of students congregated under the cover of night. Despite their best efforts, the authorities were unable to identify the masked assailant. It didn't help that none of the guests at the party came forward to testify for her. As a result, the inquiry stalled, and Zara never received justice. At the time, her parents were still living and the only ones who believed in her. This is how she overcame her great humiliation for what had occurred to her. According to Zara, after months of discussing the incident with my brother, he finally came around and apologized for his initial reaction. He realized that he should have known better and pledged to be more supportive of her going forward. Despite the strain on their relationship, Zara did not want to break it with him, so she chose to forgive him. Despite my brother's best efforts to be there for her in the years that followed, the tragedy never left her mind. I was saddened to hear this, especially since my brother had never mentioned any of it to me. Syl pointed out that my brother disliked discussing it and had even told her to keep the occurrence a secret, as if it were something disgusting for others to discover. I gently gripped Syl's hand and assured her that I didn't blame her for anything that had happened to her because it was never her fault. Syl smiled back bitterly and told me she had more to say. She talked slowly, as if each word was both a confession and a request for understanding. She then disclosed that she had been sexually attacked again after the initial event, this time by her former employer from her prior position. I remembered how, 2 or 3 years ago, she unexpectedly left her work, despite the fact that she had always enjoyed it. Syl had never told me why until now. Her hands trembled as she described how terrified and helpless she felt during the second assault. She informed me she was numb from shock during the event and could only move after the assault finished. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she departed the scene in a daze, her entire body trembling with the weight of what had just occurred. She recounted feeling detached from everything, as if she were witnessing the trauma from outside her own body. Later, as she sat in her car crying, her first thoughts drifted to my brother. She knew based on his earlier reaction that he would likely blame her again. She described how she felt the same shame when she realized she had been abused by another man without her consent. She felt unclean and repulsed by herself. This time, the trauma had a greater impact on her mental health since, unlike previously, she had no one to talk to. Her parents had died, and she was afraid to open out to my brother. As a result, she fell into melancholy and experienced a few panic attacks. Sil told me she debated whether to report the assault to the police and have her boss arrested, or to safeguard her marriage. Then, 3 weeks later, she learned she was pregnant. At that point, she was positive that the child was not my brother's. The weight of this realization devastated her even more, and she was unsure how to convey the news to my brother. She assumed he would ask for a divorce. As her mental health deteriorated, Sil decided to end her life. She told me how powerless she felt at the time, lacking the strength to end the pregnancy and not wanting others to know about the assaults. I listened to her story, holding back tears, unable to understand what she had been through silently, without any of us knowing. Sil went on to tell me how, the evening she decided to end her life with sleeping pills, everything changed. My brother unexpectedly discovered the positive pregnancy test in the restroom. Instead of waiting for an explanation, he began bouncing up and down, overjoyed that she was pregnant and that they could finally start a family together. Caught up in his joy and engulfed in his embrace, she found herself unable to bring him down with the truth. Later, she told me how humiliated she was for not having the strength to tell him the truth that day or over the course of the previous 2 years, that the child was not his. Sil informed me that every time she saw the delicate moments between her daughter and my brother, her heart broke again. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she apologized to me for lying to my brother and everyone else. She even referred to herself as a coward and a loser who did not deserve a family as great as ours. She believed that cancer was God's punishment for her falsehoods. She informed me she intended to disclose everything to my brother before she died. However, she asked me to make her a pledge. It turns out she wanted me to look after her daughter while she was gone. She pleaded with me with her hands since she had no family members left. Both her parents and grandparents had passed away. If my brother refused to accept the child after learning the truth, I was her only hope of caring for her daughter. I was quite shaken after hearing everything and needed some time to comprehend it all. As a woman myself, I felt profound sympathy for everything she had been through. I knew she was telling me the whole truth because she was dying and needed to get it off her chest. Of course, I realized that she had lied to my brother for so long about being the baby's father, but she was also visibly sorry. At this moment, all I could do was reassure her that if necessary, I would raise my niece on my own. She exhaled a sigh of relief as I fulfilled my promise to her. I continued to see Sil over the weeks as her illness advanced, holding out hope for her survival even as the reality of her condition became more apparent. She remained as courageous as possible throughout. Finally, she went away peacefully in her sleep. Her absence has created a void, yet her spirit continues to motivate me to live with compassion and gratitude. She showed me that even in the worst times, there can be grace and beauty if we have the strength to perceive it. She was more than just a sister-in-law to me. She was a friend and sincere confidant. After she died, my brother shared with me the contents of a letter written by my sister-in-law, which revealed the awful reality she had previously confided in me. He was heartbroken to realize that the child he had embraced with such delight was not biologically his. His anguish and rage were obvious as he dealt with this new reality, which was exacerbated by the recent death of his wife. In his grief, he couldn't bring himself to hold the infant anymore. Instead, he told our parents and me that he was going to give her up. I firmly told him that Sil had asked me to look after my niece, and that I wanted to take care of her even if he no longer wanted her. This is how I welcomed my niece into my home without hesitation. I was really heartbroken for her because she had just lost her mother, and with no other family left, her parents and grandparents had passed away. I knew she needed a stable and supportive atmosphere at the moment. Later, when we gathered for the reading of my sister-in-law's will, everyone was already emotional because they knew my niece did not belong to my brother. Many of my family members were divided over this news. However, Sil was no longer with us to face their fury. According to her will, she made specific and careful plans for her daughter's future, leaving every asset and resource she had amassed over the years for her daughter's benefit. Sil had a large fortune from both her parents and grandparents, so she had a lot of money to leave behind. To my brother's sorrow, nothing was allocated to him, exacerbating his pain and sense of betrayal. He yelled loudly that it was wrong of her not to leave anything in her will for him. Sil had specifically stated that she had committed the management of these monies to me provided I was willing to take on the responsibility of caring for her kid. This news surprised both me and everyone else present. I suppose this is why Sil wanted me to make that pledge to her weeks before she died, so she could update her will accordingly. She was correct to believe her intuition and not allow my brother access to her assets, since if that had been the case, he would never have let my niece have anything and would have abandoned her without money. My brother was unwilling to continue caring for the child, therefore I was eventually granted full custody of my niece. I've been able to care for her all these years because of the financial support I received. My brother attempted to battle me over the money Sil had left behind, believing he was entitled to at least half of it. However, the judge did not listen to him. Enraged, my brother told me that he didn't want anything to do with Syl's daughter and that he never wanted to see my face again, saying that I had betrayed him by taking in the girl. I firmly told him that I was sorry for all of his sorrow, but I was not going to break my promise to Syl. My sister-in-law's decision to keep the facts from my brother was wrong, and I acknowledged that. However, now that she is no longer with us, I am convinced that the child is not to blame for her parents' conduct. This is why I've always focused only on establishing a caring and secure home for my niece, sheltering her from the intricacies of the past. Over the years, I've used the funds Syl left behind to ensure that my niece has everything she needs. I've also purchased a home for her, which my niece will entirely inherit once she reaches adulthood. I've made every effort to send her to great schools and care for her as if she were my own daughter. I am not married and have dedicated my entire life to raising my niece. Despite my best attempts, my niece, understandably, has concerns about her parents, especially her father. She misses my brother, but she understands that relationships cannot be forced in these circumstances. My decision to prioritize my niece's well-being has affected my ties with my other family members. They have all chosen to cut ties with me and no longer invite me to family gatherings, claiming that my actions are foolish and that I have prioritized my niece over my own. Even my parents believe I should have given up my niece and have often expressed their disappointment that I am raising someone else's child. As you might expect, the past several years have been a challenging journey in which I've had to negotiate the chasm between what I believe is right and the ramifications of those decisions on my family connections. This year, as my niece approaches her 18th birthday, I feel a sense of accomplishment as I prepare to transfer all of her assets, including the property I've acquired for her per Syl's desires. It's a significant achievement for which I've worked hard. I feel like I've done everything I could to protect her up until now, and she's ready to make her own decisions. My brother contacted me unexpectedly last week, saying he needed to discuss something very serious. My heart skipped a beat. I hoped he'd realized his mistake and wanted to reconnect with me and my niece after all these years. I agreed to meet with him, but I didn't want my niece to find out and get her hopes up until I knew why he was visiting. So I planned for us to meet when she was at school. When my brother came, there was a sense of expectation and warmth as we made small chat. He told me he has since remarried, and I was pleasantly surprised to learn that he now has 2 children of his own. He showed me images of them, and his boys looked exactly like him. I was disappointed that he hadn't invited me to his wedding, but I understood that he did what he had to do after Syl had deceived him. During our talk, I couldn't help but feel proud as I highlighted my niece's accomplishments and improvement over the years. I informed my brother that she occasionally inquired about him and was fairly mature for her age, thinking he would say he wanted to see her. Despite my excitement to communicate these wonderful tidings, he appeared indifferent to my niece. He interrupted me, his tone immediately changing to one of seriousness. He explained that he had come to meet me not to discuss my niece, but to request ownership of her house. I stared at him wide-eyed as he told how his family had suddenly lost their home and that our parents had already loaned him a large sum of money over the years, so he could no longer ask for assistance. Since he knew I had purchased the house with Syl's money, he believed it was only fair for me and my niece to let him keep the house to accommodate his large family while we relocated to a smaller space. I questioned him why he thought he could even pose such a question. My brother went on to defend it by claiming that he had previously done a lot for Syl, but she had turned out to be nothing more than a leech. I knew this wasn't true because Syl had always worked and paid her portion of the bills, including throughout her chemotherapy treatments. She covered her own medical expenses and had health insurance. I brought this out to my brother, telling him that it was ridiculous for him to expect a house when he hadn't even bothered raising my niece after Syl died. This simply made him angrier. He told me that, as his sister, I should stop holding a candle for a deceased woman and instead assist him and his family in securing the house before my niece turned 18. He persuaded me to view things his way, saying that the house was his legitimate possession. The weight of his words hung in the air as I considered his request. I couldn't help but consider the ramifications of such a decision. The property was more than simply a physical asset. It symbolized security and stability, which had been meticulously planned for my niece's future. To give it up, no matter how badly my brother needed it, would mean breaking commitments and risking the stability I had fought so hard to establish. My niece's well-being and future were paramount, and any decision involving her assets had to be made with her best interests in mind, no matter how difficult or emotional the situation. In that moment, I grasped the gravity of the situation and the need to stick to my beliefs. I informed him unequivocally that I could not support his request and that he should take responsibility for his own family rather than relying on his deceased wife's possessions. I continued to tell him how ashamed I was that he even considered this option, and how he had given up all rights when he handed over custody of his daughter to me following Syl's death. My brother's face flushed red with rage at my statement, but I continued before he could interject again. I voiced my disappointment that he had not been present for my niece during all of these years. I didn't hesitate to remind him that, while I realized Sil had betrayed him, he should also see that she had been the victim of countless traumas. It was unjust of him to put the blame onto her now, especially because he had not supported her after her first sexual assault. When I revealed the assault, his eyes widened in amazement, and he demanded to know how I knew about it, as no one else knew the truth. This is when I told him that Sil had confided in me and entrusted me with the task of caring for my niece before she died. When my brother heard this, he became accusatory, alleging I had surprised him and labeling me a liar, just like Sil. I shook my head, reminding him that Sil was terminally ill and had already endured enough. After all the years of him not taking responsibility for my niece while I had done everything I could to assist her, he had no right to bring up the past and complain now simply because he wanted Sil's money. I was weary of him constantly behaving like a victim. It was disheartening to see him shift blame and claim entitlement when he had not been financially supportive of my niece for years. His boldness in coming 16 years later and requesting ownership of her house felt like a slap in the face, ignoring all of my sacrifices and attempts to assure my niece's well-being and future security. My brother was unhappy because I refused to give in to his demands. Since our meeting, he and my parents have called me often, accusing me of being difficult for no reason and insisting that I have family devotion to them rather than my niece. It's demoralizing and terrifying to discover that when it comes to money, even your own blood relatives can devolve into something unknown. I continue to stand up for my niece and refuse to give in to my brother's unreasonable demands. Update 1. First and foremost, I am astounded by how kind everyone has been in my DMs and comments. Thank you for making me grin. Second, I can't tell you how many women have contacted me, giving their own stories and saying how closely they connect to what Sil went through. I wish I could give every one of you a great, tight embrace and relieve your anguish. Sexual assault is one of the most horrible things that can happen to a woman, and I wish someone could have helped Sil at the time. She wasn't a bad person, and she didn't deserve what she went through. It's unfortunate that I have to defend her, but just because you haven't suffered sexual assault doesn't imply others don't. Sil had demonstrated amazing courage following the first assault, but the second occurrence left her shaken, rightly so. She was immobilized in fear, as many sexual assault victims are. I wish she had felt comfortable enough to open up to me sooner, because I would have been there for her in every way. Knowing what she went through crushes my heart, and I wish I could have been there for her during those difficult days. To those who label Sil a cheater and question her narrative, I really pray you never go through such anguish only to have your truth challenged. If Sil had really had an affair, she may have instructed me to contact the man for custody after she died. Furthermore, if there had been an affair, the man would not have remained silent all these years. He would have most certainly come up, especially given how much money Sil left behind for her kid. If she had an affair, I'm sure she would have wanted her daughter to know her biological father. Sil did everything possible to safeguard her daughter. Update 2. I sat down with my niece and told her that my brother had lately been to speak with me, and his main goal was to gain control of the house. I advised her to be cautious if he ever approached her. As I talked, I could see the rage and pain in her eyes. She had hoped for years that her father would reach out to her because he actually cared. However, when she discovered that his contact was motivated by his own wants, she felt deceived. I can't believe him, she informed me, her voice shaking from emotion. After all this time, he only reached out when he needed something. She informed me that she did not want anything to do with him and expressed her gratitude that her mother had not left him anything. She then hugged me and expressed her gratitude for everything I'd done for her over the years. Her statements were simultaneously painful and empowering to hear. It brought tears to my eyes as I understood that despite the sorrow of her father's acts, she was strong and determined to carry on without him. Update 3. After speaking with my niece, I decided to send a lengthy email to my parents and brother to document everything and state my position clearly. In the email, I described our previous interactions and highlighted that they had no right to ask me to hand over my niece's home to my brother. I stressed that this request constituted financial fraud and stated unequivocally that I would take legal action if my brother attempted to see me or my niece again to request the house for his family. I informed my brother that by choosing not to care for his kid, he surrendered all rights. I also discussed the numerous difficulties and frustrations I had encountered while raising my niece on my own, with no prior experience. I highlighted the emotional, financial, and logistical hurdles I had faced in providing her with a secure and caring home. I also informed him that he had never paid child support or checked in on his daughter in all these years. I pointed out that he and my parents should feel nothing but guilt for attempting to take something that did not belong to them. I insisted that they had no right to suddenly intervene and make demands after all this time, especially because they had contributed nothing to her upbringing or well-being. The email was detailed and sincere, reflecting the sacrifices I had made for my niece. I reaffirmed my resolve to protect her and honor Syl's wishes no matter what. My message was clear and unequivocal. They had forfeited their right to be a part of her life due to their negligence and lack of support, and they had no place in her future. I never received a response after submitting the email. However, my brother and parents have not contacted me again, which is satisfactory for me. The silence speaks volumes, and I'm happy to have some peace knowing they won't meddle with my niece's life anymore. My niece is now preparing for her prom and impending birthday celebration. Watching her manage these thrilling occasions makes me very proud. I am so proud of the woman she has become, and I can't wait to support her at every big milestone in her future. It makes me emotional just thinking about how much she has grown and how much she resembles Syl, especially in her lips and brows. Every day I see Syl's strength and tenacity in my niece, and I only hope that she will be as strong as her mother, no matter what she does. I overheard my fiancé say my money was the best part of me, so I humiliated her. She trashed my house, and now I'm taking her to court. I am now 29 years old, with an MBA and a very lucrative position in my father's firm. I know this makes me sound like a snobbish affluent kid, but please hear me out. Growing up, we weren't doing well. We battled a lot, and our family was deeply in debt. I was young at the time, so I don't remember every detail, but my father made a highly hazardous loan with our house as security, which was the only valuable asset we had because it was his grandfather's. That money was what let him launch his business, and despite a tough start, things improved. It wasn't enjoyable at the time, but looking back, I'm thankful that I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I believe it made me more down to earth and helped me understand the importance of hard effort. This experience prompted me to get an MBA because I wanted to contribute to what my father had established. While it may appear that I'm merely the son working in his father's company, benefiting from nepotism, I confess there is some truth to this, but I also know I'm there on merit. I worked hard and put forth my own effort to help the company flourish. As a result, my family and I are both financially secure. Because of this, I've become quite cautious in relationships, knowing that we didn't always have this money and don't want to wind up with someone who is only interested in my bank account. In my mid-20s, when things were going well, I dated a lot. Many of my dates did not even make it past the first date. I probably only went on a third date a few times. Then, 2.5 years ago, I met someone named Brianna, not her real name for obvious reasons. She was beautiful. When I saw her smile, I wanted to go say hello. I discovered she was a nurse, which made her even more appealing to me because it is a career I much admire. I asked for her phone number, and that was the beginning of our relationship. I've always been careful in relationships, and I approached them with the goal of determining whether the individual could be my future wife before taking things too seriously. I aim to make sure that money is only a minor part of the reason someone is with me. I don't want somebody to be with me based only on the fact that I'm attractive. Brianna did not exhibit any gold-digging activity that I noticed. She was intelligent, witty, and brought everything I desired to the table. So 2 years after we met, I proposed to her, and she accepted. Brianna is currently my fiancée, and she promised to spend the rest of her life with me, which made me very pleased. I'm about to get to the point of this narrative, but first, there was one important event that soured me. It is worth highlighting. Obviously, as we got closer, Brianna learned more about my family's financial situation. She knew my family was not impoverished and that we were doing well. A few months after the proposal, I mentioned the possibility of a prenuptial agreement. To be honest, I felt it was a perfectly acceptable conversation, but she disagreed. She flipped out. According to her, suggesting a prenuptial agreement was bad for 2 reasons. First, it appeared to her that I did not think our relationship would last. That is not true, but even if I'm completely dedicated to the marriage, if she wakes up one day and says she is done, I have no influence over that. Second, she interpreted it as a sign that I did not trust her not to rob me if things didn't go as planned. That's the gist of it, but we ended up arguing for an hour and going to bed upset with each other. After pondering all night, I informed her that the prenuptial agreement would be unnecessary. Yes, I know it was silly, but I loved her so much that I decided to let it go because I didn't want the prenup to be the reason we broke up. Following all of that, things improved between us very quickly. Now, I truly need third parties to tell me what to do. One of my fiancé's colleagues was holding a barbecue, and she encouraged me to join them. I decided it would be a wonderful opportunity for me to meet some of the people she worked with, as she referenced them constantly. When I arrived, everyone was friendly, and I had a terrific time. To be honest, I met several of the nurses that worked with her on most shifts. At one point, I was outdoors talking with a fellow about sports and investments. I knew she was inside conversing with her pals, and that was okay. When I realized I wanted to use the restroom, I returned to the house via the back door. I'm not sure how to describe it, but the back entrance led to a hallway that terminated in the living room. Standing at the rear door, you couldn't see anyone seated in the living room until you turned the corner. As I was headed to the bathroom, I heard my fiancé's voice among others, and it was evident from the first sentence that I was the subject of talk. It began with them discussing how well I dress, which naturally led to how pricey my clothing is. Then my money showed up. The girls were chirping and smiling as they discussed how fortunate she was to have found someone with money. Then I heard my fiancé say something that hit me hard. He has a lot of money, and honestly, his money is the best part of him by far. This was followed by more giggling and laughter. She even said, he asked for a prenup. I said no, of course, I need to be able to pay out if things go south. More laughter followed. At that point, I walked back out of the house. I honestly did not need to use the restroom anymore. When we returned home, she recognized something was wrong with me, but I didn't tell her until she went to bed. This happened a few days ago, and I'm not sure what to do. She's a wonderful person, and I adore her, but I'm having a struggle with myself about whether I should dismiss it as dumb girl talk that went too far, or if it's worth canceling everything we've planned for the wedding and kicking her out of the house. I honestly don't know what to do. My mind is telling me to stop things since this is exactly what I didn't want. Someone who values my money too highly. She was the perfect lady for me just a few days ago, and I hate how quickly things changed. My heart is asking me to talk about it, but I can't figure out why. I would appreciate any and all advice. Edit 1. Many people believe that I should not have compromised on the prenuptial agreement and should have stopped things right there. Many of you expressed it in overly harsh ways, but I have strong skin. If I had the chance again, I might not have done things differently, but I agree that I would give someone else the same counsel that many of you are giving me here. I should have remained firm on the prenup since, even if I decide to stay with her, the comment I overheard emphasizes how essential a prenup is to her. Edit 2. I'm inclined to agree with people who think I should terminate things now rather than take a chance with someone who has demonstrated that my money is his major concern. The only issue is, I believe the best case scenario is that we revisit the prenuptial agreement. I know it would protect me, but it wouldn't necessarily change her attitude toward my money. But isn't it natural for someone to appreciate that their partner has a nice income? Edit 3. Okay, I've had a lot of sense instilled in me. I will still bring up the prenup to see what she says, but I am ready to terminate things. I adore Brianna, therefore it's difficult for me to let her go. I want to know if I gave things a chance. Update. Here's the update that I know many of you have been waiting for. The story about my fiancé, who I overheard telling her friends that my money was the best part of me, has concluded, and I am overjoyed with how things turned out. The first thing I needed to do was speak with Brianna again about the prenup. I believe it was about a week after we returned from the cookout that I told her to sit down for a discussion. When I informed her we wanted to talk about the prenup again, she blew up, like she had the last time. It got even worse the second time around. She complained about how it showed I didn't trust her and wasn't rooting for the relationship to succeed. I attempted to explain that it was about defending my father's hard work. I own a substantial portion of his company, rather than protecting myself. But she wouldn't have it. She kept yelling, and I tried everything I could to persuade her of my point, but nothing worked. I asked her if she would marry me if the prenup was a requirement. She didn't ponder long before announcing that she would seriously examine our future together. At that time, I realized I couldn't win her over. I informed her that after the first time, I was willing to drop the prenup, so I asked her to guess why I was bringing it up again. She was obviously bewildered, so I promised her I'd help her figure it out. I asked her to recall a conversation she had with her nursing colleagues at a friend's cookout. It was all she said. We talked about so many things, I don't know what you're talking about. I responded, you don't recall smiling and joking with your pals, claiming that my money was the nicest part of me. You don't remember telling them you couldn't sign a prenup because you wouldn't get the cash if we divorced. At that point, it was evident she remembered what I was saying because she began to quiver and appear incredibly anxious. I waited for her to affirm or reject what I had stated, but she did not respond. I pushed her to talk, but she only stared at me, her hands trembling. I'm not sure why, but that made me giggle, and it appeared to set her off. She started crying and wailing without responding to anything I had said. At that moment, I was frustrated that she had nothing to say, and I expected a response from her. So I told her that the wedding was no longer going to happen. She slumped on the ground, muttering please, through tears and sniffles. I stood up, went into our room, locked the door, and went to bed. The following morning, she was waiting for me. She didn't appear like she had slept all night. When she saw me, she approached me and was extremely friendly, but I shook her off. She attempted to explain the context of what I had overheard, stating she was simply trying to fit into the Gossip Girl ambiance and did not mean what she had said. She accused her friends and colleagues of being terrible influences. She argued that my money was not the reason she fell in love with me. I thought it might be true at first, but I had the impression that she had grown to adore the money. She claimed she would sign the prenup and that it would not be an issue for her. Even with that, I didn't know what to say to her. I took her hand, looked her in the eye compassionately, and carefully removed the engagement ring from her finger. I had paid a lot of money for that ring and I didn't want it to end up in her hands. That hit a nerve. She began crying, but quickly switched to cussing me out. She branded me ugly, unattractive, with a little penis, and even queer. She stated she slept with a man she met at a bar simply because she felt like it. I'm not sure if I believe that part, but it really doesn't matter anymore. She stated my money was the one thing she liked about me and she wished she could have milked me for more. She threw every insult she could think of at me, and I eventually started giggling. That's when she started throwing stuff at me. As much as I wanted to remain calm and unconcerned, she began flinging some potentially deadly stuff, so I ran to the bedroom and shut myself in. It took almost 2 hours until things calmed down. When I came out, she had left, but she had wrecked the entire apartment. I was enraged, and in that moment, I knew I had made the proper decision. I photographed everything and obtained footage from one of the indoor cameras I'd put. After that, I left the house and went to sleep in a hotel because it was complete pandemonium, and I had no idea where to begin with the cleanup. This is where I chose to have fun. I visited her Facebook and Instagram profiles, where she had announced our engagement. I composed a message. I'm sorry to inform you that the wedding has been canceled, and I am no longer engaged to Brianna. She acknowledged being with me solely for the money, and when I challenged her about it, she lost her mind and wrecked my house. If you have any queries, please ask her. I replied to each and every comment. She despises looking awful in front of others, so this aspect was very enjoyable. I then created my own post, displaying the devastation she had wreaked, as well as brief bits from video of her trashing the house during her tantrum. I tagged her relatives and friends, as well as the hospital where she works. The last one was just for fun, and it felt wonderful knowing that some rumors about her would circulate among her colleagues. Her parents called me several times, but I didn't answer. It's unfortunate that I have to cut ties with them because they were such kind people, but that's the way it is. She contacted me dozens of times after I had done all of this, and when I answered, she was crying and threatening to kill me for wrecking her life. I don't believe anything I did was permanent, so she was simply being dramatic. She raged about how I humiliated her with the brief bits I shared, and how people now refer to her as Brianna of Tarth behind her back since she acted so aggressively in that video. That part made me laugh so hard. She was crying because everyone was now looking at her differently. I'll be honest, I was concerned she'd do something wild because the tantrum she threw at home wasn't quite the Brianna I knew. In the end, nothing occurred, at least not yet. I called the event coordinator and canceled all wedding-related activities. That portion was heartbreaking, I'll admit, but it had to happen. Once that was over, I realized she and I were done. The nicest part for me is that I'm bringing her to court to get compensation for ruining my stuff. I begged her to pay properly, but she just called me some nasty insults, so I don't mind putting her through some extra stress just for fun. She will have to pay a lawyer, lose days of work, and perhaps be obliged to compensate me for everything she has ruined. Believe me, that was a lot. The matter is still pending, but I have a recording of her acting like a bull in a china shop, and I've already spoken with my lawyer, so there's no need to fear. She won't be getting out of this one. There's still a little sadness in my heart because something I had high hopes for didn't work out, but I'm glad I discovered how she truly saw me sooner rather than later. I'd rather be in pain right now than in much worse pain later. Anyway, a huge thank you to everyone who helped me out, especially with my prior post. I will read all of your comments here, so please let me know what you think of how I responded to her. Brief update. Oh, and a little update for anyone reading this thread. I was awarded $987 for everything she ruined in my flat, including hotel bills because I couldn't remain there and professional cleaning fees because the place was a complete disaster. I had a tremendous smile on my face because I was getting money from her after we split up. I guess she should have asked for a prenup. Arrogant boss fires expert, leading to pound 800K project disaster. Sweet revenge unfolds, but the story ends in tragedy. Who am I? Do you know? It backfires on an egotistical manager when an $800,000 project goes off course because he sacked an invaluable staff member. First of all, this never happened to me. I was with the individual when they got a call concerning this problem. Then he walked me through it all. He is not on Reddit, hence I am sharing it. It is valuable. Every name has been modified to guard corporate and personal identities. The plot depends much on listed structures. There is a mechanism in place in the UK for maintaining historic and significant constructions. A building deemed historically significant is referred to as a listed building. The guidelines for its evolution, preservation, and enhancement are rather rigorous. I have to be obscure about the labor involved. Else, it would be too simple to name the people engaged. David, a buddy of mine, is quite specialized in a very small field of building. Using a very ancient building technique not used for several millennia, he fixes and renovates buildings. His whole output focuses on listed buildings and conservation projects. Work needed on a Grade 1 listed property. ACC Limited, the major contractor, was handling the building generally. There is quite specific study on one aspect. The architect provided a list of suitable candidates as the contractor management knew no one who had done it. The contractors selected my friend since he was most available early on. 5 days into the project, the major contractor, ACC Limited, arrived on site. David's words? He was a boisterous gobshite throwing his weight about. David ignored him while he was merely working. One of his carpenters was directed by the boisterous gobshite to make him coffee. The carpenter vanished. The noisy gobshite kept prowling and grumbling about delays costing him a lot of money. The boisterous gobshite asked my pal a question 15 minutes after the carpenter vanished. "Where is that chippy with my coffee?" asked a noisy gobshite. Chippy = carpenter. Chippy = carpenter. "David, I'm not clear." "Go and find out," a noisy gobshite says. "David, I'm only here for this job," gesturing at the walls. "I work for ACC Limited, not for you." Noisy gobshite. "It makes no difference if you're an employee or a subcontractor. You still are working for me. Now go and locate my coffee." David: "First of all, I find it offensive to be spoken to like manners. Second, my contract with you is to do these walls, nothing else. I most definitely am not a gopher." Noisy gobshite. "Oh, do you not value being spoken to in such a manner? For which subcontractor do you now work?" David: "None. I run my business alone, just me." Noisy gobshite. "A day laborer. And you have the guts to address me in such a manner? Do you know my name?" David: "Sure." "Well, you're fired," a noisy gobshite says. "Get out of the premises right away." David says, "Okay." "Just get off the site," says a noisy gobshite. David grabbed out his phone and started recording. David: "Okay, I'll leave. Just want evidence you advised me to leave." Grabbing David's hand containing the phone, a noisy gobshite yelled into the phone, "Get off the site, you idiot," a noisy gobshite says. "You're let off. I'll have you thrown out if you're still here in 10 minutes. David: "Cool, not problematic." He took up his gear and left. The contractor's site manager passed him, ironically with a coffee for the boss, as he was leaving and smiled. Site manager: "Dave, you're leaving early?" "Bloody part-time kidding." David: "No, your boss just sacked me. We have signed out our contract. Apologies, friend." The site manager said, No, allow me to arrange things here. Please wait, kindly." David left the site. Knowing something the boisterous gobshite lacked, the site manager was losing his head. In the UK, just 7 persons are certified to handle the task. Every one of them had a waiting list. David had been the only one accessible. 12 missed calls by the time he arrived home. That was Thursday, 2 working days absent so far. He claimed he would go back only if he was paid for the extra days and personally apologized to the employer. I met my friend as he was answering a call from the site manager, stating the boss apologies but is out of the country, so cannot apologize personally. David also informed me he warned the other specialist over the phone, but they had all been contacted on Friday asking to be assigned work. Nobody picked up the work. They were all booked full. To warn him, David also called the architect. Under such circumstances, some dishonest builders attempt to falsify the work and bodge the job. David is going to keep his guns, money for all missing days plus a face-to-face apologies. He is positive he will grasp it. I mentioned I would pay anything to see the in-person apologies. Update 1. The site manager called to inform David he was advised by the noisy gobshite to threaten legal action should David fail to complete his work. The site manager became really ashamed and apologetic. David reminded him he left and had documentation proving he was let go. The site manager called once more to inform the noisy gobshite will be personally apologizing on Friday. Could David begin tomorrow? David said no. Following the legal action threat, the criteria are different. Before work starts, a face-to-face apology. Additional compensation for lost days. Paying the whole contract value up front before work starts. All of this has to happen on Thursday. He can start today and still expect to finish before his next reservation. Should he work weekends as well, he has just enough time. I questioned him about why he isn't charging the man who is such a wanker a hefty extra fee. He remarked it's not the done thing to take advantage of businesses under time constraints. It looks that. One of my pals apparently is a guy from the 18th century. Edit. When David mentioned just 7 others do this work, I misinterpreted him. He intended 7 different companies distinct from his own. Since they are small companies, he argues it is most likely just about 20 persons capable of doing it. Still a limited amount, although not as humorally tiny as 7. I apologize for misled all of you regarding the count. Update 2. Sadly, an apology appears unlikely. David has found that the site manager was sacked for not alerting the noisy gobshite of the circumstances earlier. David told the operations director for ACC Limited, the second noisy gobshite, that he would not be returning to the position, so an apology is not needed. Apologizing for everything, the operations director promised to very liberally renegotiate the money. David informed him he had only thought about returning to the position as a personal courtesy to the original site manager. He feels no need to go back as he is not there. The operations director indicated he will contact David but omitted any explanation. Why he didn't say, "Give him his job back, or I won't come back," I wondered. David remarked the boisterous gobshite is too weak and petty to be guided by a craftsman. It will have to be the concept of the company for the site manager returning. They won't bring him back if I order them to. David thinks it's difficult to obtain a job at 61 since the site manager is excellent at his work but only 4 years from retirement. I have decided that David appeals to me even more than 3 days before. 3 updates. It is 2 in the morning here. We just came out of the bar. David answered a call from the dismissed site manager while we were out. David reported the circumstances to the architect this afternoon. The architect got in touch with the terminated site manager to let him know about a company needing a site manager. Just before 9 p.m., the dismissed site manager called David. I had to sit through the one-sided phone call. I had to have looked like I had a house full of sparrows, childishly thrilled. Then David filled in for me. The site manager rang to thank him and find out his preferred drinks so he might bring him a bottle. He is seeing them on Friday even though he does not yet have the new job. The architect is hopeful since apparently his advice has some weight. David first rejected. David, I did not get you a job. The architect done. Site manager, but you told the architect I had been sacked because of you, therefore you set all this in motion. I never have to deal with that annoying pillock ever once again. David left no clear identification for the irritable pillock. We will have to conjecture. David mentioned his drink is Cardhu Gold Reserve. He declared he would only take a bottle if A. The site manager lands the new position. B. Should the site manager visit and sip the Cardhu with David. The whiskey consumption does not seem to include the attractive scribe who painstakingly and time-consumingly skillfully recorded this narrative down on Reddit. David elegantly said, "Piss off, knobhead, you can get your own drink." Except that nobody gets to see the tosspot noisy gobshite eat crow when he has to apologize. All excellent news ideally. I had great anticipation about that. David and the sacked site manager know each other outside of the office. Though 2 separate clubs, they are members of charitable organizations in the same location and cooperate extensively. David is Roundtable, whereas the site manager belongs to the Rotary Club. Though you never know, I doubt he is a knight. David was contacted by the operations director of ACC Limited to propose that they kindly renegotiate the money by bringing the site manager back. They have missed the boat, David says. He cannot finish the work on his own before beginning his next employment. Should all go without a hitch, there is an absolute minimum of 11 days labor left. David's next employment begins on November 4th. Assuming he works weekends, there are 10 days left. Last minute. I wish I could be a fly on the wall when the noisy gobshite is informed. Many people often ask, what does David do? If I said what it was, it would be quite identifying. I could as well tell you his actual name and address. Apologize. There are extremely few of them since it takes 5 years to become just competent and at least 9 years to be a master artisan. At least one master present is needed for the jobs done. Update 4. Bad news. The site manager who was sacked did not land the other position. He met the new company, but they are not extending an invitation to him. The explanations are not obvious. David is seeing him Sunday to go over it. Though David is not at blame, I can sense he feels guilty about it. The site manager claims he will act regarding unjust firing. Though I imagine this would be a win-win-win, I suppose life isn't like that. News about the sacked site manager. The current state of affairs is not as dire as first assumed. We misinterpreted what transpired on Friday. David chatted with him yesterday. That aspect is accurate. The employer he visited on Friday is not hiring him in the usual manner. On a distribution center build, they have, however, presented him with a fixed-term contract spanning 18 months. Though not ideal, on the plus side it pays somewhat more than ACC. Though just 18 months, it is better than nothing. Should another project surface, the new business also has the option to extend the contract. David has heard that someone Bulgarian is visiting to cover for the work. David was grinning when he informed me. He believes he understands exactly what will happen. Some 19th century Sophian structures feature a comparable but different method that was used. David believes the man will apply such an approach. Though two extremely crucial elements are different, it looks comparable. David has opted to hold off. David is going to advise the client and the planning department to verify the two components. He intends to allow the Bulgarian to finish the job and get paid. The Bulgarian will have used the incorrect tools unless he is familiar with the English approach from the 17th century. It would mean pulling it apart and beginning over. They treat this kind of work quite rigorously. Though I hardly desire this, I truly hope this comes true. I'm a minor dude. More info. Many people are wondering when David would find out whether the Bulgarian performed the work as expected. Given that there are few vendors of one of the materials, David might know really quickly. Should the Bulgarian get in touch, David will be informed. David said, "It's a tiny incestuous part of the industry, and they gossip like old women." Correction. Like older women, we all gossip. David is leaving it alone till told the work is done and the Bulgarian is paid if he does not visit there. He wants not to jeopardize the man's money. David said, "I don't want the Bulgarian to drag his arse over here and go home empty-handed just because I can't wait to drop silly bollocks. The man has a living to support him. I'm going to wait." Silly bollocks is the same person as noisy gobshite, just in case of uncertainty. Unless he works weekends, the Bulgarian should finish his job in 3 weeks. David will know when the work is done as he knows several people at ACC head office and several on site. I must thus wait on my hands for 3 to 4 weeks and appear to be a non-excited 7-year-old girl not complaining about Christmas approaching. Update 5. According to David, the Bulgarian got right to it and began working. Materials have been delivered, but from an ordinary building supplier. Though they sell it in Bulgaria, the items he requires for the work are too heavy for him to carry with him. He hasn't asked for it from the UK provider. 3, but only one has enough for this work since David brought it in for her. He is therefore not using the correct materials unless he is arriving by road and ferry. Though he was not bothered by raucous gobshite, David would not let it go unrecorded. He is a purist in terms of historical accuracy and truly enjoys maintaining all the structures he works on. I therefore have to hold my water for 3 to 4 weeks. David claims he might finish earlier if he uses more contemporary materials. If you stay in the 17th century, 3 weeks is the period. About this work, I have become such a weirdo. David knew I was after information after I phoned him earlier under cover of pretext. "Do you want me to fit a body cam so you can watch and hear everything as it happens?" David asked me. I answered, "That would be great if it would not be too much trouble and you could link me into your phone calls." Laughing, David said, "You knob cheese, is it okay if I cover the lens when I'm shagging my wife?" Personal Ollie, I don't do those two things at the same time, but whatever floats your boat, I said. David, you are telling me you do them separately. Me? Right after she washed all the garbage off the sheets after doing you. A few of us are finicky. David said, "Piss off, you're an uptight clean freak." Hangs. Not farewell, not see you shortly. English behavior is not what it once was. Though I realize it doesn't look like it, really I do have a life. I never would have thought I would be typing Update 6 when I originally started working on this. Update 6 Many news stories. 2 weeks ago the Bulgarian completed his work and returned home. Those who met Stefan the Bulgarian said he was a decent man and a really diligent worker. He worked weekends and 12-hour days to help to offset the expenses of living in the UK. David is glad he waited until Stefan paid before he reported the work, knowing what he discovered about Stefan. David already felt rather certain Stefan was not performing as required. None of the 3 companies he checked, the sole UK suppliers of the most unusual substance involved in the job, said they had an order for the site. Stefan might have imported it, of course, but nobody on site had seen an international material order. As scheduled, David thus made calls to the client, the architect, the local authority planning department, and Historic England. He waited for them to investigate after outlining his worries in the simplest, least invasive manner possible. Though it just took a few days, I can really say that I have never been that nervous or committed in anything unrelated to my pissing business. The architect produced the first report on incorrect materials and technique applied. Not the English one demanded, he had applied a Bulgarian technique from the 19th century rather than the 17th. The architect was really agitated. David Avid stated this phone call was blue, but he had never heard the architect using foul words before. The architect apparently termed the boisterous gobshite, ignorant cockwomble. David defined a womble for me. I knew nothing. Approach is welcome. Not wanting people to believe this was anything to do with him, the architect said he was going to get in touch with the local authorities. Most of the remainder came to David's second or third hand. He knows some of the staff from ACC. I wanted to know whether it was challenging to get them to tell him anything. He mentioned they lacked the quick adequate phone pickup ability. The location was visited and the work examined by the local government planning officials. They informed the contractor that the work had to be cleared and corrected since it was totally improper. Then it became fascinating. Looking about the property, the inspectors discovered a problem. It would be too simple to pinpoint the buildings involved, hence I cannot be exact about this. The builder had wrecked some of the structure. Though it was not very significant, there was an internal feature included into the roof construction. Although they were not led to, they removed it and replaced it with a far superior modern support. The project manager, the new site manager, or staff member neither understood the significance. Who ordered it to be replaced with a cheap, quick alternative rather than the slow, expensive, rebuilt option? Of course, it was noisy gobshite. Destroying anything on this kind of property is illegal, jail sentence type of crime. It's a huge fine even if they avoid jail. Everyone in that company is thus pointing fingers at one another and claiming no accountability right now. According to Noisy Gobshite, he did not direct the internal roof structural components to be removed. The project manager has email proving he did. The client asked all of the contractor's employees off the site on Tuesday, the 19th. They are currently looking over everything. They're most definitely firing the contractor. They have written guidelines for bids from fresh contractors. They will also sue the contractor for the expenses of undoing and fixing all they have done improperly. The architect's projection came at £800,000. The local government planning department wrote to the contractor detailing their mistakes and alerting them of their intentions for inspection and the likelihood of prosecution. On the day the letter arrived, Noisy Gobshite vanished to the lawyers, claims the staff. Within an hour, David received 3 calls from 3 separate ACC phones as word of the letter spread around the workforce. Now we are awaiting a few things. 1. The client's checkup. Should that prove ACC has damaged the site, the client is entitled to terminate the contractor. ACC has a huge repair debt and does not get paid. 2. Local authority inspections conducted by conservationists. Should they have destroyed elements of the property, the local government will punish ACC as a company and the individual responsible. David is rather disappointed since it is impossible to rebuild the internal framework lost. That was sitting there performing its job for 400 years until that gist stain enters the picture, he said. It goes then, and that is it, never again. He comes across as really depressed. I'm guessing Noisy Gobshite is yearning he had his own coffee that day last month. Edit, the letter to ACC, not their actual name, did not threaten a prosecution. It simply made them aware of the intention of the planning department to send a professional to check the construction and, more especially, the changed area. Apparently, should prosecution take place, it takes eternity. My real apologies for misleading all of you. Like everyone else, I was overly eager to grab my pitchfork and start believing the worst. Wishful thinking mixed with Chinese whispers meant that the story was far more serious and advanced by the time it reached David. Though it's more likely to be in 6 months than in 6 days, Noisy Gobshite may well be prosecuted. Since I started, that represents the second correction. I promise to try to be a little more deliberate on next revisions. My error, not David's. David cautioned me that not everything that comes in your ears has to flow directly out of your tongue. You're very eager to feed the masses. Although they might believe you're currently farting rainbows, if you make a bollocks of the data, this won't last. Like always, he is correct. As uncomfortably customary. Information asked. A few have inquired about the fate of the sacked original site manager, but I wasn't sure until now. We met in the pub. David, the site manager, 2 others also. Subject to fidelity insurance checks, he most certainly has the new job. His starting date is February 9th. ACC paid him off in place of notice. Firing is done according to convention. They paid him just over 3.5 months' wages in one lump as his contract provided 3 months' notice and he was due 12 holiday/6/vacation days. He also gets to retain the car till March. I was shaking like a dog when he fired me, he added, but the wife reminded me that I could take my pension early and how much I hate that company, especially that dodgy pillage. I stopped worrying when the architect contacted me about the distribution center job. He started the new work on a somewhat better pay after landing it. The main drawback is that the employment is just guaranteed for 18 months. Although it's not certain, there's a great chance the organization will retain him following that if they have work. He first intended to bring Noisy Gobshite to an industrial tribunal for unjust dismissal. Now he won't, since he won't suffer financially. Obviously, I'm glad I'm not losing money, he remarked, but I was looking forward to beating that Watson in court. He is building a better sleigh and several reindeer with the additional time right now. Certainly, a sleigh. It's on the rear of a truck. Father Christmas is on the sleigh performing Christmas carols at window-rattling volume, gathering money for charity while his company strolls the area decked as elves and snowmen. I have oftentimes been pulled into it. He brought David the promised whiskey. David advised he shouldn't, but the site manager remarked, "Why, Yorkshire men keep their word, even to a shower of soft shandy-sipping southerners like Ulan. Besides, I'm not risking breaking this lucky streak." Even the alcohol came at half price. Simultaneously pointing at him, David and I said, "A real Yorkshireman." For the uninitiated, Yorkshire residents are known for 2 things: highly straightforward communication and financial restraint. We left the pub after ridiculing him for implying that I was a southerner and headed to the garage of the site manager so we could sip the whiskey and appreciate his sleigh building work. Would they send me some freebies if I told you all how great Cardhu Gold Reserve tastes? Born close to Carnarvon, Saeeglf, I'm Welsh and am sobbing in Bith, hence you have most likely seen some awful grammar. I'm full of whiskey, so right now I'm debating. It is past my bedtime. 1 a.m. Bye for now. Update 7. I believe there might be some karmic justice en route. Interviews under control have been conducted with Noisy Gobshite. It indicates they are ready for the possibility rather than that they are absolutely suing him. They will also do so with the sacked site manager next week. They also followed the same process with the project manager. The site manager is sure he has nothing to concern about. He was sacked, hence the decision was taken to remove the pieces of roof support. He added he was sure the Noisy Gobshite would have sought to assign culpability to a site manager if he had been present at the time of the illegal modification. He said, "That cowardly slope-shouldered turd would have shot all over me to save his own skin." Fortunately, the project manager has evidence in the form of an email proving Noisy Gobshite ordered the task. Noisy Gobshite sought to convince him not to forward it on to the local authority planning department. He threatened him when that didn't work. That backfired when the project manager told the investigators that Noisy Gobshite instructed him to delete the email in addition to neglecting the risks. My buddy, a lawyer, informs me that destroying evidence and meddling with a witness are crimes in of themselves. Noisy Gobshite will not stop excavating a deeper hole. If he gets away without facing legal repercussions, I will be really let down. He is nevertheless clearly in pain. The major story of the week? Noisy Gobshite has been let off. After learning from no less than 4 separate ACC workers, David announced it yesterday, Saturday. They eagerly wanted to tell him, he said. Then the discussion followed this pattern. Me, how is that feasible? How does the owner find himself let off? Did he stroll up to a mirror and declare, "You're as much use as Anne Frank's drum kit, you're fired"? David, nope. You know he inherited the company from his uncle and dad. Me, exactly. David said, you know his brother and cousin own a slice each. Me, anyway. David, they fired him since their combined share is over 50%. Louise, the accounts manager, told me they are pissing their pants. As long as the money came in, they were content to leave Noisy Gobshites in charge, but today their golden goose seems very sick. Losing this contract and the fees and penalties scares them since it will close the company. They therefore ask the customer owner to bring ACC back to complete the deal. Part of that is persuading the building owner that Noisy Gobshite has nothing bearing on the business. Clearly, they are putting Noisy Gobshite beneath the bus. According to Louise, a Noisy Gobshite fired at him with screaming and violent threats. He required escort off the property. He has been phoning staff members, posing queries, and acts shocked when individuals refuse to assist him. Louise claims he truly wants to be loyal to him and thinks the staff like him. The man is in cloud cuckoo land, she declared. Me? He will be really offended. I wish I could have seen the face of Numpty as it was developing. David says, it's nothing that the scrot doesn't deserve. I promised the person who told me I wouldn't tell anyone yet, hence there is another, but I can't tell you about it. Me? You tease. What relevance does it have? David. It's significant. Transformational for the theme in life. Me? I wish I could tell you. It nearly gave me a hard-on. Me? Thing hell, it must be big if it can get that ugly appending to do anything except hang there like the last chicken in the shop. David. What a drama this is. She believes I should share with her this confidentially anything I learned. Given our marriage, she expects me to be able to tell her everything. I said it's not something I keep secret. Though I had hoped I would get, I appreciate you have integrity, dear husband. No. Mrs. here is enraged since she believes I'm a knobhead. Louise's employment title and name have been changed to defend the innocent. I don't want any of you holding your breath. It looks like it will be a few months before he can provide me with this fantastic news. The building owner, client has completed their inspection. 2 portions are unacceptable, the damaged section and the one David ought to have completed but Stefan did instead. They are rather unhappy. Usually, the local government believes it's the owner cutting corners when listed structures are harmed. In this instance, though, the owner is an austere ancient institution committed to maintaining significant structures. They didn't enjoy having to establish they had nothing to do with the building's damage as they are not used to being accused of anything dubious. David stated it appears they have written off ACC since they have made a type of tendering request to multiple other firms specialized in conservation. Then he spewed a bunch of jargon I neither knew or recall. Me? They have asked a few firms to quote a price for the job in simple English. David says, that's a very simplified way of describing it, but I don't have the time or the crayons to explain it to you. Me? Okay, let us say they are requesting job-related prices. Condescending, hence I was anticipating this tale would develop to a crescendo with noisy gobshites suffering something terrible. But it's just sort of faded with a whimper while we wait to find out what legal action will be pursued. Real life moves slowly, quite inconveniently. January 21, 2020. Hi there, this is Mark's wife. The moron requested me to apologize to the internet for his silence. On January 7th he was injured in an automobile accident. Though he won't be online for a little, we are confident he will fully recover. I explained it's only Reddit, but he's a compulsive freak about not disappointing others. I thus assured them I will include Reddit in the list. Here I am, informing all the folks he doesn't know why he hasn't finished imparting something they most likely aren't reading anyhow. March 2nd, 2020. Hello Mark, once more his wife. Direct messages numbered more than 200. I appreciate all of your remarks as well as your wishing of him well. I have read them all to him. I'll address the 3 most often asked questions. Mark's situation changed what? A big lorry drove straight into the rear of him while he was still stationary in his automobile about to exit the freeway. Between that lorry and the lorry ahead of Mark, his automobile was destroyed. Among his multiple shattered bones are nose, left orbital and cheekbone, left radius and ulna, forearm, left hand, right tibia and fibula, lower leg, and 4 ribs, one of which pierced his left lung. His left eye's center vision is somewhat damaged, however we hope this is transient. He needs more surgery since he has some tendon damage in his right hand and has 112 stitches overall. Though he looks like a wreck, he might heal free from any serious damage. If it were me, I wouldn't cope, but for as long as I've known him, he has always been as hard as nails. I went to pieces when I initially arrived at the hospital and he was lying there covered in blood, cables, and tubes and couldn't talk properly. In minutes, he had me giggling. He has always been really adept in knowing the appropriate response. Not being able to use his hands is the thing most bothering him right now. When ought he to change the narrative? It might take some time. Though I could ask the guy David contacted for an update, I most certainly cannot tell a narrative like Mark can. I'm obviously biased, but Mark seems to be the most entertaining man I have ever met. I start to laugh so much I cannot breathe as he and David get going. I have advised him to temporarily forget about everything but getting well. If it starts to disturb him though, I've told him I'll do some secretary role-playing and he may write the narrative to me. He will finish it. He always finishes what he starts on. I wish my self-discipline was 100th that of his. A few have inquired whether they might give him money, cards, or gifts to cover missed income or medical expenditures. Thank you so much for offering, but it's not necessary. As we live in the UK, fortunately healthcare is free. He wants none of anyone's money. There is a long-standing charity we have sponsored called Macmillan Cancer Support if anyone feels driven to do something. At last update, knowing who I am would help you. The David against boisterous gobshite narrative. The 22nd of May 2020. Slough mainly grunted. This username belonged to Mark, my spouse. He penned the narrative on his friend David and a company owner he referred to as noisy gobshite. Up until he was in a January vehicle accident, Mark had been updating the narrative. He requested me then to let everyone know he was hurt and to update the narrative after he recovered. Mark sadly died barely over a week after my previous comment. Everyone thought he was healing, but he passed out and died extremely rapidly without warning. Although the team did all they could to save him, his aorta had burst. They claimed it is not unusual in auto collisions and had most likely been damaged during the accident. Although I'm sorry I didn't update this earlier, to be honest I totally neglected this page. I discovered how many people were waiting for Mark to wrap up the narrative only after I returned to go over Mark's words once more. Though I'm not sure how many people will view this update, would you kindly forward this news to everyone you know who was waiting for Mark to respond? Many thanks. I appreciate the hundreds of people that posted get well notes for Mark. I'm sorry I ignored you all for so long. But for the past 3 months I've been bewildered. Mark would have chastised me and most certainly objected to my leaving everyone in uncertainty. Many thanks to the persons who sent Macmillan Cancer Support money. Though it seems odd to have money given in the name of mostly Gruntled. At last, I want to thank the moderators, especially /u/Marari01, for guiding me and outlining how I might notify everyone. Monday, May 24th, 2020. For the wonderful messages and virtual hugs I have seen over the past day, I am most grateful. For hours I have shed tears. One finds it difficult to define what good sobbing is when one loses someone. Those who have lost a loved one will most likely relate. Most of today has been good tears thanks to your postings and comments. Your thoughts have helped me to consider all of Mark's amazing traits and all the reasons I so much loved him. I began working on the update, then gave up around 8 times before mustering some fortitude. I am rather happy I did it. I appreciate once more the final small push I required from the moderator /u/Marari01. It also helps me understand that I wish to undertake one more activity Mark would have liked. He consistently brought his starting work to completion. I will find out what has happened by talking to his buddies. I'll try to get myself current with everyone's outcomes. I know some of it already. I tell you ahead of time, it will be nearly the facts, not like Mark's writing. Though I lack Mark's natural storytelling ability, the comments clearly indicate that many people were hoping for a resolution. The bare facts will have to be sufficient, please forgive. I'm going to talk to David, the guy he contacted. This year he has been a total rock for me. With luck, he will be able to cover all. As soon as I can, I'll input the change. I greatly appreciate it all. You are unaware of the extent this has benefited. Friday, May 25th, 2020. Mostly because to what you all wrote, yesterday I had a better day. I woke up today enraged and cannot seem to calm myself. England observes a public holiday today, and I find myself wondering what we would be doing if Mark were here. He never threw a holiday away. I'm furious since, just because some self-serving moron couldn't wait to respond to a text message, I have lost the best person I have ever known in my life. I find the stupidity and unfairness intolerable. He will spend a few years behind bars. Not one thing, though, will bring my Mark back. Sorry, folks. I simply needed to let out a vent. Please, kindly, avoid using your phone while driving. Also, avoid tolerating it if you notice others doing it. March 6th, 2020. I want to highlight 2 points. Firstly, let me thank everyone for their comments. The lovely things you have spoken about Mark have cheered me. It took so long to tell you Mark had died since I never imagined they would. Still, you did help, even though what you said was so poignant that I broke down hundreds of times reading the great words. Second, I'm sorry for not yet answering every comment. On some days I feel I could talk about Mark all day. On others, I cannot even think of him without going to pieces. If I haven't replied to your particular comment, it's not as though I haven't read all of them. Simply said, I can't respond as I have been in a poor state portion of the time. Eventually, I will answer to everyone, much as I did very slowly with the cards during his funeral. It looked like I was climbing a mountain that wouldn't stop expanding, but I finally answered all 322 of them even though I didn't think I would get through them all. One of numerous decent habits I picked up from Mark is finishing what I start. I only want to hear him once more calling me Carrot. Carrot is a Welsh term for love. My name is not Welsh. July 27th, 2020 at 3:10 a.m. Whoa, I hadn't been online for a few days and now hundreds of messages show up. I can't sleep once more, and it came to me that I could change what happened to every one of the characters Mark had penned. It's just the facts. It won't have Mark's style or humor, it's just basic knowledge. Still, it's the most I can accomplish, and more than nothing. Starting in the new post on a building project for a distribution center, site manager followed plans exactly. Mark had already mentioned what David and the site manager were dissatisfied about. Though that was before the coronavirus, being on a fixed 18-month contract as a self-employed individual was a drawback when compared to being an employee. Most of the staff were let go after the virus struck. Some were furloughed. The contract required the corporation to maintain paying the site manager whole. What he considered to be a negative aspect turned out to be a saving agent. The last David could tell me about Noisy Gobshite was that he no longer owns a third, as he had to sell his part of the company under pressure. Regarding his assets, he had to sign a personal liability agreement in case total obligations exceeded the company's worth. According to what I understand of it, Noisy Gobshite must pay the extra, even if it means he loses his house, if, for example, the total bills for his mistakes are higher than the company can pay. They couldn't continue trading if he was participating, hence he had to give up his part of the company. He needs them to carry on paying the attorneys. Though he hasn't been charged with a crime yet, he most certainly will. Something to do with wanting to be ready to go to court once he is charged. They take their time researching and being ready before they charge him. It also came to light that he warned of similar, but somewhat more minor, damage to a listed property in 2011. According to David, some anomalies found by the local government during the inquiry were forwarded to HMRC, the taxman. Also under investigation for that scam is Noisy. One of the first remarks on Mark's post was expensive cup of coffee, an understatement if ever I've seen one. The major headlines would be on Noisy Gobshite and the sexual assault, rape, of one of the PAs in the ACC headquarters in 2017, as well as sexual harassment of other employees. Though it wasn't boisterous Gobshite, the sexual assault occurred. It was former finance director. Stories of sexual harassment of female employees have not evolved and proved to be mere gossip. David. Working on his own and without social distance problems, he's most likely one of the few persons who were not impacted by the COVID-19 epidemic both financially and practically. He has carried on rather as normal. Job is easier, he stated. The usual plonkers are not there to trip on my equipment or stick plank ends into my finished work. David is not doing personally very well. David took Mark's death worse than anyone else outside his family. He tries not to show me this. He is a rock when he is with me. He has kept me from falling. Among three persons, he is the one I feel I can truly let go concerning Mark, or so I thought. David's wife was really nice and empathetic when I spoke with her last week, but she had to tell me to hold back a little with David. Although his wife claims he is shattering, he seems strong to me. She says he has taken Mark's death extremely severely. I thought he and Mark were close friends. She claims that in all their marriage, she only saw him cry once, that of their dog's death. When his parents deceased, she missed him crying. She notes he seems lost now and has sobbed quite a few times. The worst thing to find out is that his crying period falls after his visit with me. I'm awful. He obviously was mourning, but I had no idea I was burdening him so much. I'm going to cease venting all my suffering and be more cautious utilizing him. I wish he had said sooner. Maybe I should have known about it instead of being so self-servingly preoccupied with my own loss. That is as far as I'm aware of the updates cover. They are ready to observe his charged with noise. Should he be found guilty of damaging classified buildings, he might find himself imprisoned. Should he be found guilty of fraud, he will almost surely be imprisoned. In either case, the fines will be 6 figures. David mentioned wondering whether he would like prison coffee. His sense of humor is dark. July 27, 2020, at 3:10 a.m., there were alerts for 512 private messages and comments when I first arrived online earlier. I have no idea where to start. If you have written, kindly please not assume I am not appreciative as I have not responded. I felt fit to write at 3:10 a.m., hence I updated. Right now, I doubt I could accomplish it. I have been staring at our weddings video. Though I believed it might help, I feel like a bus has knocked me down. I was devastated by Mark's speech. He discussed our meeting and his return to the house he shared with fellow Royal Marines. One among them asked Mark, "What's the joke then? You're once more smiling about something. Come on, what's so funny here?" Mark claimed he couldn't and wouldn't explain it to them. He just couldn't stop smiling every time he considered our date. Every time he thought of me, he claimed, he felt that. It made me grin and started me to cry on our wedding day, but this morning it broke me. I believe the agony is growing worse rather than becoming less. It bothers me too. All through me I feel it. I can't stop it. All I can think of lately is wish I had been in the car with him if I cannot have him back. Being an atheist, he always advised, this is all you get, so don't dare waste any of it. Therefore he wouldn't approve of me harming myself. It's just so difficult to keep going with this suffering. I doubt I can. I simply want it stopped. I apologize for carrying on like way. I would convey this to those I know since they worry, but writing here is like shouting into a diary. I apologize to all of you. Though I try to control things, I miss him so much and I can't stop it hurting. What should I do is unknown. August 31st, 2020 is. Although I responded to hundreds of messages since last updating this post, I did not get through all of them. Though the screen says I still have 92 waiting, I cannot see or read any more of the messages in chat. Should you not obtain a response, you fall into the 92. Our anniversary yesterday, August 30th, though I was looking forward it, when it came it was sort of empty. I cried when I viewed our wedding film. I replied to a few messages. Halfway through one message, I became abruptly overwhelmed with the knowledge that all the happiness I will ever experience in my life had already passed by. Every future endeavor I try will just be rewritten as Mark should be here but he isn't. Everything from here till I die is simply life. Just breathing and watching the days pass. Without Mark, it seems quite meaningless. I'm not sure whether I could write ever more. I appreciate all of you volunteering your time. You're really beautiful folks. Clutch the people you love like you might lose tomorrow. Avoid doing what I did and believe you could live in your own little heavenly bubble always. In the blink of an eye, some lazy morons can destroy all you love, leaving nothing ahead of you. Bye.